Greetings, my name is Duncan and thank you for coming to my channel. Thanks for dropping in. This is the Grumpy News. And there's a lot to be grumpy about at the moment in the world. What I plan to do over the course of the next few videos is to look at various flashpoints around the world, various events that I think have particular significance and particular resonance within our lives and essentially are future shapers. That is, events that are going to have significant repercussions down the track. The first of these is an event that commenced, well, we may say 3 years ago, but actually the conflict has been going on a lot longer, and that is between Russia and Ukraine. This is a particularly significant event, a particularly significant conflict, and I'm going to explain why I think that is. So going back 3 years ago when Ukraine was invaded by Russia, a nuclear-armed state, first of all, it's important to state straight away that Putin made an incredible error. In fact, we may call his invasion of Ukraine Putin's folly. And the reason for that is that he completely miscalculated, firstly, the resistance that Ukraine would field and the capacity of Ukraine to repel the Russian attack. Not only that, he failed to properly assess the capacity and the readiness of his own armed forces, and there were huge logistical problems and logistical errors that occurred. And those first days of the attack on Kyiv, it was apparent that there was a significant lack of what we might call whiz-bang. And that is, when we look at Russia as an advanced technological state, we would have expected a greater degree of use of technology, a cyber attack occurring at the same time, and so on. So Putin miscalculated all of this, and it was a major error. And let's talk about what's driving his attack on Kyiv. And the first thing to remember is that his attack on Ukraine essentially had nothing to do with NATO per se. It had all to do with what Putin regards as the essential element, or his essential task, and that is the reconstitution of the Soviet Empire, that empire which collapsed in the 20th century, and the collapse of which Putin has held since then as a grievance. For him, the Soviet Empire should never have collapsed, and his aim is to reconstitute that empire, first by taking Ukraine, which will essentially provide a strategic gateway to the rest of Europe. Having done that, he will incrementally attack the other states of Europe while concurrently attempting to weaken Europe internally. Now, if you look back, when he attacked Ukraine, NATO was in a weakened state. It had let its defense forces run down over a significant period of time. Macron had called NATO brain dead. And Putin had managed to ingratiate Europe into the Russian energy system. So pipelines such as Nord Stream and so on. He felt that Europe would not be able to act to assist in the defense of Ukraine in any way and in any form due to the dependence that Europe had on Russian energy, on Russian oil and gas and so on. And these resources made up a significant portion of Europe's imports. So Putin miscalculated there, because Europe was able to pivot and pivot very rapidly away from away from dependence on Russian gas and oil. That was done very quickly, as it should have been done. This was an appropriate response to Putin's aggression. But the thing about Putin is that we have a clash of mindsets. The Europe and European Union existed and came out of centuries of conflict between warring European states. So Great Britain, England had wars with France. Germany was divided into various states. At one point, the English monarchy ruling over one of the states of Germany and so on, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the subsequent fracture and dissolution of that, and so on. So Europe, for centuries, has been in a state more or less of permanent conflict. Following World War II, there was a change of thought, and what the European leaders at that time decided upon and conceptualized was that to trade together, this will form a glue that will keep states together and stop them warring. This was the vision of the birth of the European Union. That when states come together, trade together, share resources, export, import each other's goods, then this would create a glue that would hold states together and would make war less likely. And this really has been a profound success. It's absolutely unthinkable that there would be war within the major states of Europe, although, having said that, we have seen war in Europe, such as when the dissolution of Yugoslavia into its various warring states. But in general, Europe and its vision has been incredibly successful. And Russia was invited to participate in this vision. So in inviting Russia, for instance, to build Nord Stream, the oil pipeline, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, they were inviting Russia into essentially the European Union as a major trading partner. And imagine, if you will, a huge meter on top of Nord Stream 1 or Nord Stream 2, and it's marked in dollars, and Russia is pumping all this oil into Europe, all this gas into Europe. You can imagine day to day it would be $1 million, $2 million, $500 million, $1 billion. Huge amounts of Russian resources would be purchased by the European Union. Can you imagine a more advantageous arrangement for Russia and indeed for Europe? And Europe, of course, was paying top dollar for these Russian resources. So Putin made this huge miscalculation that Europe would not pivot away from dependence upon Russian energy imports. So this was a massive, massive error. The other thing that has to be said is, and my take on this and my take on what's happened to Putin, is that he missed the opportunity to reinvent Russia. The old Soviet Empire collapsed essentially for internal reasons. The West stood strong. Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, all of these old Cold War warriors, they stood firm. They held their defense budget strong. They didn't bend to Putin. They didn't bend to the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union collapsed within itself. It collapsed because its system, the Marxist-Leninist economy, communism, is essentially an inefficient system. And in the end, it just could not compete with the efficiency of the West. So the Soviet Union collapsed for its own internal reasons, as in fact almost all empires do. So Putin held this grievance that this had occurred, and he called it the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. In fact, it wasn't a tragedy. Like any empire, it's an opportunity to actually reinvent oneself. Now, when Putin decided that he wanted to reconstitute the Soviet Empire, someone or anyone forgot to tell him a profound truth about human history and one of its dynamics, and that is that empires never are able to reconstitute themselves once they collapse. So if you look back through history, all of the empires, including the mighty British Empire on which the sun never set, every empire from the furthest back in history has never been able to reconstitute itself. The Spanish Empire, the Portuguese, the British, as I've said, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, all of these, any empire that you care to look at, the Roman Empire, they've never been able to reconstitute themselves. And they seem to fade away into almost irrelevance. So my take on Putin is that it was around the time of the Sochi Winter Olympics. And I think at that time he was presenting Russia to the world as a relatively open society, one that was open to foreign ideas. It welcomed the world. It essentially held basic human rights values for its citizens, which have since, following the war in Ukraine, been eroded significantly. But we see that he, instead of choosing to reinvent, and I think this is a psychological tendency on those of us who are older, to hark back to the old days, and that this history has a greater pull on us, and I mean a personal history. So for Putin, he would be thinking back and saying, oh, the great days of the Soviet Empire, the power that we had, the control that we had, our significant sphere of influence that we had, this would have been his psychological mindset, the good old days. So we get to a certain age and it's harder to reinvent ourselves because of the pull of this nostalgia. So I think that Putin, in view of his advanced age, was really not quite capable of thinking in a manner that would have reinvented Russia as the predominant power within the Federation of Russian states. So I think this was the greatest error on his part, and that's the reason why it came about. That in the most simple terms, no one told Putin, empires do not reconstitute themselves. This has never happened within history, and it's a fundamental dynamic of history. And this is why Putin will not be successful in terms of his Ukraine war. Having said that, we're at the point now where Donald Trump has actually been elected, as we know, to becoming the President of the United States. And again, the enormous political prestige, economic and military power of the United States always make it a significant factor in any major conflict of this sort. So it's like World War I and World War II. It's the entry of the United States that significantly changed the dynamic and led to the victory of the Allied powers, say in the Second World War. So America has been and remains pivotal in this and in the resolution of any of these types of conflicts. Now, just recently, initially, Trump said, we're going to solve the Russian-Ukraine war within 24 hours. Well, that hasn't happened. He has assigned a ex-general, General Kellogg, to be a special envoy to actually attempt to negotiate an end to the war. And then they began talking about 100 days. More recent events over the last few days have really reflected a significant disorganization within the Trump administration. They're saying things now like Ukraine can never be a part of NATO. Ukraine can never return to its pre-2014 borders, which, as we know, is 2014 is when Russia took over Crimea. And so what they are doing is actually telegraphing what they're already prepared to give away. I think this is a huge mistake. So initially, I thought that Trump was really on the right track, and obviously everyone wants an end to this barbaric and ridiculous war that's been instigated by Russia and by this dictator, Putin. Everyone wants an end to this, the slaughter of Ukrainian civilians, and not to mention the death of hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers. No one wants this. And plus the incredible squandering of money on military resources, which could be used to better means. No one wants this. And so how we're going to go now is we're going down a path that's fraught with danger, because we don't quite know as to whether Trump has a grand strategy or whether he's playing everything, as it were, on the fly. And this is my sense of Trump at the moment, that he's easily distracted by what others say about him, or who may pander to his ego. And I'll have more to talk about in terms of the Trump administration in another video, because there's some things that he's doing that are fantastic, that should have been done a long time ago. But what he's doing at the moment with Ukraine, and what he's done now, is he's sent this negotiating team to Saudi Arabia, I believe. There he'll meet with the Russian team. We don't know essentially what experience these people have, what their instructions are. We know what the instructions will be to the negotiating team on behalf of the Russian government, that is Putin, and that is: get as much as you can, do not give anything back, leave Ukraine in a weakened state, continue to attempt to demoralize Europe and foment internal conflict within the European states, drive a wedge between Europe and the United States, attempt to dismantle NATO. That will be Trump's negotiating position. Well, of course, he's not telegraphed that, as he shouldn't. But it seems to me that the negotiating team, or Trump, has telegraphed this, and they're talking now of NATO. Ukraine can never be a part of NATO. Well, as far as Trump is concerned, there are no other effective security guarantees for Ukraine if it is not a part of NATO. I really don't know what other security guarantees there would be. The Minsk agreement has been walked over by Russia. So this is a huge error on the part of the Trump administration to, even before serious negotiations have started, to telegraph your most basic position, and to say Ukraine can never be a part of NATO and it cannot recover its pre-2014 borders. That's my video for today. I'm going to talk about a lot of subjects in my forthcoming videos over a huge amount of matters affecting the world, current affairs, and life in general. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.